Great.
All right. So, hi, I'll start with a little bit of an introduction about our district. We have about 50,000 students. We sit kind of smack dab in the middle of a different county, so we're really the city of Atlanta public schools. It's a funny little district. We have a real wide range of populations that we serve. Overall, about 76% of our students are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, but those populations are typically concentrated at specific schools, which we'll get into a little bit more in the presentation. We have 88 total schools. That includes our charter schools, and 65 schools have more than 95% of their students eligible for free or reduced price lunch.
Great. And then just an introduction of us. So I have a background in economics. I got a master's and bachelor's in arts. I've worked in K-12 education policy for ever since I left grad school. Fun fact, I'm a blossoming MLS fan. It's funny, the last time I gave this presentation at TC17, the U.S. men's team failed to qualify for the World Cup. And I don't know how many people follow MLS, but Atlanta just got absolutely trounced this weekend, so I have wonderful timing with this presentation.
And I'm just now realizing I totally skipped the introduction. I went right into our content, so thanks, Thomas, for pulling us back in. Mary Hardigan, originally background in journalism, kind of switched gears when I got my MPA and began working in district data departments. And my fun fact, binging on The Crown. I know I'm a little bit late to the party, but that's my current obsession.
Great. I just do want to hit on this because the mission of APS is with a caring culture of trust and collaboration, every student will graduate ready for college and career. Since this is a K-12 audience, I'm sure many of you have heard more than a few stories from Atlanta when it comes to Atlanta public schools, and this is why it really emphasizes culture of trust and collaboration going forward. And then every day we're thinking about, whenever we use our dashboards, how does it benefit our mission? How are we better preparing our students to be ready for college and career? So with that, Mary, I'll let you dig back into some of the summary statistics for APS.
Yeah, so this is where I got started. What we're really getting at is that our schools, a lot of them have really high concentrations of students living in poverty, with a pocket of schools that are kind of have the opposite demographic, with very, very, very few students in poverty. So it's a really interesting portfolio that we have. A little bit about our specific division. We work in what we call the Data and Information Group, DIG. Formally, we call it the student data lifecycle, because we kind of go from when a student enrolls at APS, they put their information in our student information system, through where they test, we gather more data points, all the way through to the research and evaluation point where we put that information to use. Thomas here has called it the APS data Triforce.
For a very good reason.
For a very good reason, but really this organization, I know it's a little unique within districts to have these three departments sitting together, but we found it really beneficial for our work and ultimately the data visualizations that we're going to show to you today. And here is that Triforce reference that I gotta admit I don't get, so I'll let Thomas.
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, as this entire group comes together, our purpose is to use data to create a beneficial change for our district and in the lives of the students that we serve. But what does that data look like? So in Georgia, we have what are called the Georgia milestones. There's summative assessment. We administer it to grades 3rd through high school. And whenever the students take these Georgia milestones assessments, they're placed into achievement bins based upon their performance. So beginning being the lowest, distinguished being the highest. And this is important because a lot of our state KPIs, it's called the Career and College Readiness Performance Index, they're based on schools' milestones performance. So this is our state report card. Whenever we look at our data, typically we look at the percentage of our students that are at least meeting the second lowest level or above, so developing and above. And we look at that for APS, we see that we have some of the highest performing schools in the state and lowest performing schools in the state. As a whole, the district is behind state average in performance. And what I show in this graph right here is the difference between our FRL students and non-FRL students. There's a large contrast in performance between these two groups of students, which I think really points to, and I'll bring out a quote right here, how the achievement gap between children in high and low income families is roughly 40% larger among children born in 2001 than those born 25 years earlier. So really hitting on this achievement gap between the high and low income students, FRL and non-FRL students, which digs into the meat of our presentation where we'll be talking about what our turnaround strategy is. But first, I think I just want to show how prevalent this is throughout the city of Atlanta. So what we have right here actually is a map of Atlanta, and this is by census tract. So we're looking at median household income. We notice that between North Atlanta and South Atlanta, there is a large, once again, difference in median income level. And we actually mapped out the percentage of our students that are developing and above for each of our elementary attendance zones. And it's almost a mirror image with the map whenever you look at median income levels. And this isn't just at the elementary school level. This is at the middle school level, as well as the high school level. And this is why we really are focusing on this turnaround strategy. This gap needs to be reduced, right? And so as part of a larger plan, our district and our superintendent has made it their focus, along with the board, to put a lot of investment into trying to remediate and trying to provide the supports that students need in order to solve this issue. And so I'm going to let Mary talk a little bit about what our turnaround strategy is and the types of supports that we're providing throughout this strategy.
So the turnaround strategy is something that our superintendent implemented last school year. It's about a $30 million initiative that is geared towards all of our schools, but ultimately targeting about 15 or 16 of our chronically low performing schools to try and do whatever we can to bring them back up. The three kind of levels of support, foundational support, that's for everybody, which includes a district-wide balanced assessment, which we're going to get into when we start showing you our dashboard. And then there's a level of intensive support for schools that need a little bit more than foundational support, which typically it's a lot of PD, professional development. And then we've got 16 schools that are receiving what we call targeted interventions, which is really high touch support. It's really wide ranging. There's a menu of options that they choose from. So for our department, what that means is essentially, there's going to be a lot of data that comes out of this. I think we've got some numbers here. But bottom line, we don't want our schools and teachers to suffer from what we're calling data overload.
And notice right here we kind of go turnaround strategy plus data overload. And I think this stands out to me, the amount of data that our teachers are asked to be actionable on. Thinking about this, 241,000 benchmark assessments, that's over 5.5 million questions answered across 727 unique standards, right? We're doing this, and these are benchmarks that are administered multiple times throughout the school year, right? So I think just the amount of data that is being created from these turnaround efforts, and I think it doesn't stand for just our turnaround effort, but when you think about other districts or other organizations that are trying to do similar efforts in turning either their district or their organization around, it creates a lot of data, and it's really hard to manage that data, but at the same time have our teachers be actionable on that data and be able to analyze it really quickly.
Where Tableau comes in, we operate under the guiding principle. We do not want teachers to have to be data analysts. We want teachers to be able to teach. And so we want them to, not spend a lot of time pulling down data, going through it, making graphs. We want it to be right there. The students finish testing and they can sign in and see their results. So that's where we brought in Tableau.
Right, and what it also allows us to do is it allows us to make sure that whenever we have business rules throughout our data, right, so with our benchmarks, make sure that our teachers, whenever they're given the data and a dashboard, when our principals are looking at the data, they're all looking at the data in the same way. The only difference may be what they see. A teacher sees their students versus a principal or administrator may see all students at their particular school. But this really provides us a platform for us to help teachers be great teachers, not need them to be the great data miners. If they want to be a great data miner, props to them, right? But for the average teacher, they're really just so busy with trying to make sure that attendance is taken, and students are ready for these content, for these formative assessments, for these summative assessments, that we want to allow them to easily do that analysis. So we'll be presenting an example dashboard for our benchmarks today. It's our Phoenix Assessments benchmarks. That's kind of how we branded it, the Phoenix Assessments, where it allows our staff to drill down into classroom and student level benchmark performance on questions, standards, and subjects. Also, because they're able to do this, they can quickly group their students based on their strengths and weaknesses of content to provide necessary supports and interventions. It's actually one of our first teacher level dashboards. I'm going to switch over really quickly. Should be able to see that now. So essentially we start out with, we always do a README. And I'll go ahead and say that all this data is de-identified. The teacher names are fake, the school names are fake, the student names are fake. So there's no identifying information in this dashboard. So when you do see a name, it's fake. But we always like to start with a data story. So we go start big and go smaller. So in this case, if I were a principal logging in, I would see across the district the percentage of students that fall into these performance bins on our benchmark. So red indicates the student scored 35% or below, 36, 59, 60 to 79, 80% or above. And I can quickly go through and look at different benchmarks. Let's say I'm interested in how did my school perform in the benchmark 1 and how that changed when I got to benchmark 2. We can aggregate it by the cluster. We can do fun actions like this. So instead of just looking at it by the school, we can switch it cluster by cluster and see how our clusters compare on the benchmark. And then once we get into that information, we like to guide them to a summary of their school, right? So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the classroom summary. And a principal login, they'd ask the question for my classrooms, for my teachers, how are they performing on the benchmarks? They'll see that same view where they go, okay, 80% or above, 32% in this classroom. And they interact with it. What's cool is we actually pull down every item on the test and load it into a database. And we use that database as a refresh to refresh overnight and bring that data into Tableau. So in this case, I can see by each of the standards for my science grade 5 benchmark 2 for Laura Cortez, where the biggest weakness was and where the biggest strength was. So if I see this, SC, that won't chat. Is anyone else having a problem with the audio? I'm going to keep on going. SCL4.A. We see, okay, that's identify beneficial microorganisms and explain why they are beneficial. I can say, okay, that was a weakness in this classroom. So how can I quickly identify those questions? Okay, it was questions 1 and 2. Let's see here. It looks like it was a lot of mixed answers on this question. So it seems like there wasn't a distractor on this particular question. There might have been more guessing in that class, right? So that tells me that my students need some reteaching, so maybe going over this again when I have time in one of my lessons to go over this particular standard. Versus I can quickly say, yes, this one right here, demonstrate how animals are sorted into groups. We're doing very well. Finally, we can actually, we always like to provide a one-pager source for our teachers and our school administrators. So whenever we build our dashboards, we typically throw in a printable page view. In this case, the school administrator or the teacher would click on this, click here to generate a report. It only appears whenever I make a selection. It takes me to this page right here. And now I have a nice one-pager that I can print out. I can bring to my grade level teaching meeting whenever we're going to discuss as our ELA, third grade results, or fifth grade in this case. Has the standards all laid out by each of the standards, and that nice view of the standards for all the ones that were tested. So that's our overview, right? And we always like to, like I said before, we do the data story. If a teacher were to ask, let's say, well, what about my students and their standards? Which standards do they show strength on, and who are those students? And the way we like to place it is, let's say a teacher clicks on this standard right here, and they click on the teacher. In this case, it would go straight to the students. And they can see student by student across the standard who seems to struggle with this standard and who shows strength. So even my standard that had the lowest performance, I can still see across that standard how their performance trended. And what's great is, too, in this case, I know that there's actually a written response on this where the student's going to get partial credit. So now we're able to take that calculation of the partial credit, because it's out of 3 questions, so 75% would have to be partial, and then mix it into the calculation for the multiple choice and give them a percent performance on that standard with those two blended. Once again, having our teachers do that across all their tests, all their classrooms, and then at the same time being able to quickly report this data and talk about it in a meeting, that's going to take a lot of extra time. Let's automate it for them. They can look at it by, let's say, if we wanted to go by the skill. So now I see that it's reading literature. So we like to provide these different parameters for them to look at the information. In this case, it looks like I can actually go through multiple schools, so this would be more for central office staff. Finally, item analysis has always been really important in our schools. We like to provide our teachers the ability not only to look at what are their students doing in the standards, what questions are they answering correctly and incorrectly, but what was the item? Because this is where you can go to that distractor analysis, where you even see if we have a student guessing across it. This is static for this presentation, where actually we would, if we clicked on one of these questions, it would navigate to each one of those items. But we see like this question right here, 73% of our class answered it incorrectly. And it seems like the distribution across this question was fairly even, with a little more choosing answer B. That tells me a lot of guessing what's happening on this particular question, right? So if I'm trying to go and look at the item and go through an item and actually talk about what went wrong, was there a distractor, or was it just that they didn't understand the content, or they didn't understand the question? Notice this one asks you to give the what best explains, right? Do students, have they been given a question before that asks them to choose the best answer as opposed to the correct answer? And they can look at the students that answered it correctly and incorrectly, so they can understand, even on those questions where 94% of the class answered it right, who are the 3 that answered it incorrectly. And finally, we always like to get to the deepest level of the data. So the deepest level is going to be our student level data. So we can click here, interact with the student, see each of their standard performance, question by question, even the ones that had a written description or a written response, they got a 0 right here. And we can see, let's use this one. We can see where they had strengths and where they had weaknesses. If we want to, once again, generate a report, and now we actually have a report that goes by each of the standards, and it's in a nice one-page format. So if I had students with 80% above performance, it would place it right here. If I had students that were, maybe they answered 2 out of 3 questions correctly, we can't quite say they have 100% mastery, but maybe it's just one particular question. So we say may, but then we look at, okay, what do our students need the most help with? It goes across the test and gives them the writing component score, all the multiple choice answers, whether they got it right or wrong, what they answered, and that rubric of the standards for the test. And one of the things we've done is we've actually created a batch script to go through and print these reports and place it into a PDF for our schools, because we then understood that it'd be really a lot of work for our teachers to to individually print each of their students' reports for each of their tests. So we think about that information too, about even though we want them to be printing this out, how can we still support our schools with other methods when it comes to like different Tableau hacks? All right, so I'm gonna go back to our presentation here. Great. And going forward. So this is just a recap of our 2016-2017 school year, kind of our first major year of the turnaround strategy. We had 57 schools improve their milestones results in that school year. 15 of our 16 schools that received targeted intervention improved in achievement, but as a whole, APS still lags behind Georgia in overall performance. And what this shows is on the left is the percentage, once again, on the left of math developing and above, ELA developing and above, and that change is shown on the right for ELA and math developing and above. So while we do see improvements in our schools, especially those schools with the lower achievements, there's still a lot of work to be done in our district to truly narrow this gap between high and low income schools, to narrow this gap across our entire district. And this is at the elementary level, once again, our middle school level, and finally high school. And as we think about how do we continue to support our schools, how do we continue to provide data to our community, 3 ways that we've thought of is we have a website, apsinsights.org. It's actually part of a grant we received that was from the Walton Family Foundation to create a website with tools for our parents to analyze data about their school. We also think about machine learning. It's a buzzword in data science right now. How can we utilize those types of analytics and then implement it with Tableau visuals to push out to our schools? And finally, more teacher dashboards. It doesn't just stop at one dashboard. We've actually pushed out more teacher dashboards so far this school year in order to provide more data to our teachers and also provide training to our teachers. So that finalizes our presentation. We're actually a very Twitter savvy district. So you see we have Twitter handles if you want to follow us. Our emails are right here as well. If you ever have any questions, feel free to send us an email. And this next slide says questions, but I think we're going to wait until Claire's done her session or her presentation before we go into the Q&A section. All right. Great. So Patrick or Claire, you want to pick up from right here?
Yep, I'm good to go.
All righty.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to switch over to my presentation here. All right. Well, thank you for inviting us to participate in this session. So I'll be talking about visualizing student success at Boulder Valley School District. And quickly, I just want to say Happy International Women's Day. Shout out to all the women doing awesome work in data. So my name is Claire Sims. I'm the Senior Data Visualization Designer for Boulder Valley School District. And I've just put here my contact information. And also we're tweeting about our project at BVSD VizLab. So please feel free to check us out over there. So today I'm going to be talking about the story of Boulder Valley School District using Tableau. A little bit of background about our district. We have 56 schools spread over 500 square miles in the beautiful Front Range of Colorado. We've got over 30,000 students and 4,000 plus employees as well. So what I will be talking about today is thinking about really wanting to share with other school districts and other Tableau users what we've been able to do so far with Tableau and with the resources we have. And really, we do have a small team, and so we want to talk about how are we using data visualization to impact student success in a short amount of time, again, small team, and also building from scratch. And I think, I hope this is really helpful to other Tableau users in K-12 and other areas as well. So first, just kind of a big picture timeline of where we've been and where we're at. So this work, of course, doesn't happen overnight, and actually the seeds of this project were planted several years ago. So back in 2014 is when our district started some initial discussions and setting aside the budget for this work. In January 2016, we got the initial team on board and we collaboratively wrote our theory of action for this project. In spring 2016, we got Tableau, and so since then, we have released data to district and school administrators. We did that at the beginning of the 16-17 school year, and that was really kicking off our work of getting the data to educators on this platform. Over last school year, we added content, we added out user groups, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then looking at this school year, 17-18, we've been really focusing on onboarding teachers and supporting them with a teacher-specific workbook. So here at BVSD, we're using Tableau Desktop and Server, and we've kind of branded this project as VisLab. We did that as a way for people to just connect more with the project itself. So when I mention VisLab, I'm talking about Tableau. So my idea for this talk today, I'm going to talk about some of the kind of foundations of our work that I think have helped us to be successful and get us where we are so far with our Tableau rollout. So the first piece is our collaborative design process. We really try to be collaborative on multiple levels to create these visualizations for educators. And this begins on the technical side. So we are building a data warehouse in-house here. The big reason for that is that it really helps us to de-silo our data. But also it's an opportunity to build these data structures in a really purposeful way. So thinking about what educators need and what are the reporting requirements. We also bring in end users from the beginning of the process, and I'll talk through how we've done that in one example. And we're collaborative and iterative in that dashboard design, so gathering feedback and trying to improve over time as much as possible. So as an example of that, I'm going to talk about this dashboard that we designed for teachers. So I'm going to step through our process here. There's a lot of information in these photos, so I'm not going to go into the details, but this is just to show you. The first part of our process was to gather a focus group of teachers and really work with them around what are their data needs and how do they want to be using their data to support students. And so here I just snapped a few pictures of what we got from those teachers, so hearing about which data sources they're already using in their practice. There's quite a few, I'll just point that out. And also we even had them sketch out what would they want a dashboard to look like for their student data. So we took all of that information and started sketching out some initial ideas for the dashboards and starting to fill in some of the structure and content for that. And what I'm going to show next is jump over to a demo of our teacher workbook. I'll pull up Tableau. All right, so what I'm showing here is what we call the main page of the teacher workbook. One thing that I heard loud and clear from teachers is they really want something intuitive and user-friendly. So the main page is really going for that goal. So user-friendly, we've tried to just put in, a few different links basically to different parts of this dashboard, different views. And everything is described right here. So teachers can go in and hopefully, read the little description and see what's the purpose of me going in here? What do I want to do with my data today? And that should lead them to go to different parts of this dashboard. So I'm going to jump to what we call the student overview. So what we're showing here, this is a very high level view for a teacher to look at their students in their classes. It's pretty simple on the surface. So here we just have a series of bar charts showing some demographic information about students. But the power in this is really the ability for the user to interact and kind of modify this view in a way that is most useful for them. So as an example, here we're looking at grade level, ethnicity, gender, but let's start looking at some program information for our students. So we can break down this class of students by English language learner status. And let's also see students who are served through special education, through IEP. So now we're getting another perspective on this data, but we can also even drill down further. So if we really want to focus on who are those students served through special education, as well as within that group, who are English language learners, we can start clicking, and that actually filters the view down to specific students. Oh, and I should give the disclaimer, this is all fake data as well. So a lot of interactivity here. Really, we're trying to design this so the user can go in and decide what are the questions that they have and be able to answer them through the data. Okay. So I just showed a dashboard, but even jumping in even more to our dashboards, I think this is the most visible part of the project. And so we put a lot of thought into how these are designed and how we have set these up for our educators. So a few of the things we always think about with designing our dashboards, we really want to empower our users to explore the data, but also take action based on what they learn. And one thing I always keep in mind is that this is a great tool for educators, and they're really bringing a lot of expertise to the table. So, they're already coming with questions they have, pieces of data they want to explore, and decisions they need to make. And so I think of how can we make this tool, meet them where they are with their expertise on these students. We use a lot of different Tableau features to help us design effective dashboards. So I'll show some more examples and talk through a few of those. And I do want to note that we have also been working with some consultants, the data insight partners, and they've been really instrumental in helping us with this process and standing up dashboards that are really effective for our educators. So I'm going to talk through a couple examples of how we've thought through this dashboarding process for different needs in the district. And so the first one is looking at our discipline data. So what I'm showing here is the before. We did have discipline data reporting that was already going on. And this is what it looked like. So it was a PDF that was sent out to schools every month. And it shows some kind of major statistics, high frequency events, high flyer students, for example. So this is great data. The one drawback here is that this could be even more useful if it was more timely to administrators. If they had access to it more frequently than every month, they could really be acting on it more effectively. So what a great reason to build a dashboard. So the first dashboard I'm going to show based on our discipline data is what we call the behavior workbook. So I'll jump over to that workbook now. And I'll show a few views here of our behavior or discipline data. So what users start with here is, again, a high-level overview, so they can see some of those statistics like how many behavior events have I had in each month of this school year so far? What are the top 5 events or resolutions, for example? And then, of course, getting down to students. That's really been a big thing that we've heard from our educators is, these are great summary statistics, but we also need to quickly get down to see which students are involved and think about how to support those students. So here, we could quickly say, okay, who's having trouble with discipline events in the hallway, and we can see who those students are. I'm going to show next what we call our event and resolution comparison tool. And so here's where we really get into user-driven analytics of the data. So for example, you can start to ask questions here like, what events are happening where no action is being taken? You can click there and actually see what's going on. We can also look at patterns over time, so or different summary level patterns. So what day of the week are we seeing the most issue with disciplinary things happening? So we can see Thursdays are pretty bad for us for some reason. What can we do about that? And we can break this down all different ways. Grade level. All right, second graders in this data. And then the last piece I want to show here is, I think, a real strength of our data warehouse. We do have a good amount of historical data, and we're building that history over time going forward. And so, for example, with discipline data, this gives us a good wider perspective of how we're doing year to year. So here at the top, we've got a 4-year comparison. In this example, this year is in this bold yellow. So we have a lot more behavior events happening this year than prior years. Again, we can see those kind of patterns over time, day of the week, time of day, that can help target interventions or support that's needed there. And I really like this middle view where we can see cumulative events by day of the school year. So we can ask a question like, at this point in the school year, are we, how do we compare to previous school years at the same point? So with this fake demo data, we have a lot more issues coming up at this point of the school year. So that can be really helpful, again, for school administrators and teams. All right. So that was a big improvement over the old PDFs that I showed earlier. However, we're still really focused on one data set, on discipline data. And so our next step was to really incorporate this data with other pieces of student data to create what we call our early warning system workbook. So let me bring that one up. And so what I'm showing here, this is what we call our at-risk overview. So we've got now behavior data is in here as one of 4 different what we call at-risk factors. So a student can be at risk within any one of these areas, and we also give them an overall score. So each area for which you're at risk, you get a point, and that turns into this overall score. So again, the way we're thinking of building this, first of all, bringing in multiple sources of data, also giving a lot of flexibility to the user. So how do we decide if a student is at risk for any of these areas? The user can actually set that. This set thresholds area over on the right, we have some default settings, but our users can go in and ask different kinds of questions this way. So we can capture students who are dipping below 95% attendance instead of 90, and capture more students maybe earlier that way. Again, we take this data and we can break it down by different grouping variables, and we can also very quickly get to the student level. And here I want to point out how we're using tooltips as a feature that's really helpful to give a bit more context and a bit more information about an individual student. So that was one step in terms of incorporating different pieces of data into one dashboard to use. And the last piece of this puzzle that I want to show, another way of bringing data together has been with what we call our student profile workbook. And so what we're doing here is bringing together data that's been previously stored in separate places. You'd have to log into a few different systems to go see this data. And we're bringing it into one summary dashboard. So this is available from every other dashboard I've shown, if you ever see a student name, our educators can go in, click on a student, and see their individual dashboard. And so I'm just showing an example of some assessment data here, but we also have individual student views of attendance, behavior, and grade data as well. And so the one other dashboard I want to show here before moving on is our IT service desk dashboard. So, moving into more of an operational area here of looking at processes within our IT department, this has been a really helpful and impactful dashboard as well. So this is a dashboard that provides our IT support team with some of these top most important metrics that they need to do to monitor how that work is going, make strategic plans about the work, and just always check in and see if they're delivering the best support to the district. So another piece of this, the dashboards are great. We can beautifully display the data for our educators, but we also think a lot about the rollout and support process. So how do we continue to support our users in getting the most out of our Tableau implementation? So what I'm showing here is actually just a little map I threw together in Tableau of all of our schools. So we're spread out over Boulder County. Actually on the left side of this map is going up into the Rocky Mountains a little bit. So the reason I want to show this is that we made sure as we rolled out our Tableau implementation to go and visit every single school and talk with their administrative teams about this. And really make sure that we onboarded those teams, we taught them how to interact and use those dashboards and use different features like downloading their data or signing up for email subscriptions, and also gathering feedback and other ideas that they had. And I think this was really impactful to get people on board and get that buy-in early on in the project. I've also kind of hinted at this, but we have been pretty strategic in terms of which user groups we've onboarded. So again, we're a pretty small team. And so as we were just getting started, we just started with rolling out to district and school administrators. But over time, we've built out our capacity and released dashboards for counselors, for registrars, and this year for our 2,000 plus teachers in the district as well. I'll note here also that one thing that's been really helpful for onboarding teachers is that we've implemented an automated provisioning process. So we have teachers go in and take an online introductory course in order to get their access to Tableau server and then automatically provision. And that's been really helpful for getting a big group signed up at one time. We also think a lot about embedding support and keeping that support going over time. So I mentioned before about the main page of the teacher workbook, having it be really intuitive and interactive. You might have noticed these 5 shapes that I'm showing on the right that show up in the corner of every dashboard. We call those our touchstones. Those are just basically sheets in Tableau with tooltips activated so that you can hover over each of those shapes to get a little more information about the dashboard. And one I will highlight here is this little magnifying glass in the middle. We actually have users are able to hover and see questions that they might ask about the data. So some kind of deeper analytical questions to help them dive a little bit deeper into the data. We also use our IT ticketing system to manage support. That's been really helpful. We try to be very responsive and we ask for feedback and try to have a quick turnaround in implementing that for our users, and also provide different opportunities for training. So I mentioned there's an online course for teachers, but we also do face-to-face trainings as well. And so the last piece I want to touch on here is related to our security model. So at BVSD, we have a really strong focus on data security. And as you've seen, a lot of our work so far with Tableau has been around student data, which we take very seriously in terms of securing. And so we've done a lot of work on our security model. The question is really, how do we deliver the right data to the right people? And we have to consider that at different levels, as does any school district. So we do have staff members who need to see all of the district's data, some members who only need to see data for one school, and then also at the level of student data, who needs to see data for a particular student. So there's a lot of layers here that we've worked through. And so we've done this with what I call a combined security approach. We leverage Tableau server groups, especially for granting access to district-wide users. And then we use row-level security in a couple different ways to associate users to specific schools and or specific students. And so depending on the dashboard, we can tie a user to the data that they're allowed to see, either based on their school, for example, for principals can see a whole school, or maybe just for their course, such as the classroom teacher. And so if you're interested, I'm just kind of glossing over this, but please reach out and I can share more specific information about how we actually code and implement this. And then here I do also want to call back to that training and automated user provisioning. So to get our users into these server groups and into the row level security tables, we use this automated provisioning process. And so we integrate with HR and also our teacher PD professional development system as well. All right, so wrapping up, I'm just going to talk a little about some of the outcomes that we've seen so far and kind of where we're headed, hoping to head in the future. So I think big picture, a big takeaway is that implementing Tableau has really pushed us and our educators to talk about data differently. It's changing our conversation to some extent. So now I think we're asking more questions and deeper questions about what do you want to do with your data? How would that data change your practice? And really, most importantly, how can we use this data to support students? We're also seeing positive changes happening at schools. So in general, we're seeing regular usage of BizLab in our first year of the project was associated with a few positive outcomes. So we saw some trends towards higher growth in literacy among elementary students, more catch-up among middle school students who were behind in literacy, and a decrease in chronic absenteeism rates among high school students. Specifically there was a trend for this at the schools that were regular users of BizLab within that first year of our implementation. And we're looking forward to diving into this more now that we've rolled out to teachers this year as well. So we'll be analyzing that data pretty soon. Some other outcomes that we've seen. So we're able to visualize district and school patterns in new ways to both reflect changes that we see over time, but also drive that change. So we can see where we've been and where we're at and use that as really powerful information to decide where do we want to go next and how can we do that. We've seen a lot more data use in our student support processes. So that's been really great. It's actually been our work with Tableau is really one piece of a bigger puzzle of multi-tiered systems of support for our students, but data is a big foundation in that. And anecdotally, one other thing I've heard is about teachers showing student dashboards and parent-teacher conferences. So even a tool just for that communication with parents to let them know where their kids are at and what the plan is for supporting individual students. And so I just want to end with this quote. At the end of last school year, we gave an anonymous survey to principals after having a school year to use Tableau and have this new data tool. One of our principals told us we're making better decisions for the kids based on data. And I think this is what it's all about. So Tableau has really helped us provide our educators with a very powerful tool. And so they're better equipped to turn that data into action and work towards student success. All right, thank you.
This is Patrick. Thank you, Claire. That was a great presentation. I think you could do an entire TC session just on the provisioning aspect and the taking the tests and being authorized to access piece. That alone could just be an entire session at TC. So that was great to show off. So thank you. We have a number of questions that were in the Q&A area. Might be best if you guys just want to kind of go down from the top. Thomas, do you guys have, if you want to unmute yourself, I think the first questions were aimed at you guys, and maybe just kind of go down and through them, and I'll let you guys both answer them as you go through them.
So the first question is, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? I think this might actually be on the TC17 website already. If not, I can email Patrick. Is there anywhere that you could place it?
Yep, we can put it into the user group that's just associated with this session. So if you have a copy and you want to send it to me that way, I'd be glad to post it.
Perfect. Alrighty. So the next question is, how did you do that filtered report? I'm going to share my screen again really quickly. Where is it? Here it is. So exiting out of this mode. Here we go. Sharing the right thing. Yeah. Wrong one. Here we go. So what we do is we actually have it is other visuals, but one of the things that we noticed is that we didn't, sometimes when you do like that filter on another view thing, it would have to be the same visual. You did want to customize it in some ways. So we have this button right here. It's basically just a calculated field that says generate a report, generate a report. We have the data that we want to filter by. And then we have an action that goes across the two visuals to this one that filters it. So my first action is just to filter this data to this teacher's benchmarks or benchmarking data. And now that we have this data already filtered, we're going to filter our generator report. So that's how we do that right there. Sharing. Next question. Off my QA screen. There we go. All right. So how much have these been used by teachers? So our number one dashboard in terms of teacher use, which we didn't show here, it has about 10,000 views. And just to put it into perspective, we have 3,000 teachers that are in traditional schools and another 1,000 that are in our charter schools. A lot of our charter schools, they either have limited access to this or they have no access, is my understanding. And they're also not on the APS network. So basically it means they have to VPN in order to access that. I'll say that we actually are moving our Tableau server to the cloud on AWS. And that's partly because we want to allow our charter teachers to easily access our dashboard without having to go through another authentication layer. And then two, we actually are working, I forgot to mention this in the going forward section, we're actually working to this summer push out dashboards to students and parents, where our parents and APS can log in and interact and see their students' data. And so that meant that we had to get it outside of our firewall, but still behind some authentication, like two-factor authentication, security provisions. So that's another reason that we put our Tableau server, or we have the process of moving it into the cloud. Next question, is it possible to share the batch script? More than happy to. I'll ask that you please send me an email so I have your email. And so thomas.price@atlanta.k12.ga.us. And then, so the one-pagers, they're Tableau vises, and then they're just same data using all those filters to visualize the particular one-pager information. So I think that was what we saw up to our part of the presentation. Claire, I think this first one was for you.
Great, yeah, so is our district implementing PBIS, and are we using the Swiss data suite? Can we incorporate that into Tableau? So yes, some of our schools, it depends school by school, are implementing PBIS, and a few, just a handful, are using Swiss. So far, we have not incorporated that with Tableau just yet. It's definitely been a conversation, but because so few of our schools are using it, we haven't really been able to prioritize that just yet. But that is a big question, and I'm very curious, thinking in terms of can Tableau do some of those visualizations that Swiss does better? And I think so. Let's see. Show us the student profile page. So let me bring that back up on my other screen. I'll just bring it back up here to share. So the student profile page, again, we're connecting to, via our data warehouse, multiple data sources here. So what I'm just showing here in the example is some literacy data. But again, this is just kind of set up as a series of different sheets to show these different pieces of data for an individual student. At the top of each of the sheets, there is kind of an overview of that student. There's some demographic and program participation information as well. So yeah, please feel free to follow up with me if you have more questions about this, but I'll leave that up to take a look at what that view looks like. All right, when I say small team, how small am I talking? Yes, good question. And it is a lot of work to set these up. So right now our team is essentially 2 of us. We have our data warehouse designer, and that's really important for getting the data ready and into this beautiful format that I can pull over easily into the vises. And then I'm primarily creating the vises. We are working to kind of build out our capacity. So we did invest in Tableau licenses for analysts in a few of our other departments. And they're getting onboarded and starting to contribute their own visualizations as well. And as I mentioned, we are working with consultants this year, and that has been really helpful to just accelerate our work and get us up to speed with a good group of really solid dashboards to start with.
I'll also chime in for Atlanta. So we have a core team of 4 we call them data strategists that are mainly the ones that are doing the building the dashboards, going out and doing the trainings, building a lot of the ETL processes to bring the data into Tableau. We have one person that's kind of like our main person that's working on the data side, but all the strategists are trained to work in the data warehouse as well as go out and build the viz and then actually go out and do the training.
Great. All right, I think this is for both of us. Do either of our districts use Tableau to provide public and or family access to district, school, or student data? Just for Boulder, we're not quite there yet. We are starting those conversations about public facing. And I think the family access is very early conversation level, but we'd like to get there eventually.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned before, the movement to the cloud was in order to roll out family access to our dashboards, and then apsinsights.org. We push out we do like blog posts where we visualize data about our school district, as well as we have school profiles for our parents to look at. That provides them a lot of information on the school, on different enrollment options for those schools, as well as whenever we have open enrollment for any of our schools.
Great. I saw a question about contact information, I think for both of us as well. So I'll be happy, I'll take a moment and put that back up on my screen. So you can have that, and it'll definitely be on the recording as well. So the next question I'm seeing, if we want to build student level dashboards, do we need to buy a license for each student? No, I'm not as familiar with the licensing structure. I don't know, Thomas and Mary, if you can speak to this a little more, but it's not by students. I know that.
Yeah, so we got Tableau Server 4 years ago. I think the way they do their pricing is a bit different from whenever we initially purchased Tableau Server. So basically we maxed out the cores. I think it's like 32 cores, and we have unlimited viewers. So not unlimited people being able to build the dashboards, but we have unlimited users on our server when it comes to this pricing structure. I'll say the same thing. I'm not as familiar with the current pricing structure for Tableau and Tableau Server. So maybe that might be a good question for Jordan, who I see who's like doing a little bit of monitoring in the Q&A section, to maybe to email out to them, or if Patrick, you're familiar with that as well.
Yeah, I think the best thing is to say to talk to an account manager, because there are going to be different use cases for each group. So and I know there's some things that are in flux there. So I think talking to an account manager would be the best way forward for that.
Yeah.
All right. I'm seeing, what program do we use for tech request tickets? We use a program called Easy Vista. That's about all I can tell you about it, but please reach out if you have more questions. I can get you more information about that. What dashboards did we develop for registrars? Yeah, so a big one for registrars has been our enrollment information. So we do open enrollment in our district, so we have applications and a wait list that results from that. And so that's been a really big one for registrars. Other than that, I showed that preview of the student overview. That's also a helpful one for registrars, just seeing that kind of demographic information across a whole school.
Yeah, for us, we have a data health dashboard. A lot of registrars are kind of held responsible for making sure that the data is correct. So a lot of our registrars are checking that information daily, held accountable by their principals.
Like missing SSN, gaps in scheduling, things that are going to get flagged as errors when we report data to the state.
Yep.
All right. Would it be possible to get a list of the data sets and fields that were collected to generate the dashboards? I think so. I would say please reach out to me about that, and let's see what we can get you. Like, maybe we can specify that question a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, most of the data comes from either the testing file we receive from our vendor, EduTrax, or from Infinite Campus information that we pull in through our data warehouse. But yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to share that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and for our side, since we are pulling a lot into the data warehouse, we have a lot of different sources. So yeah, we can talk more offline about that. I love this next question. Can you add student pictures to the student profile? That has been on our list for a while. We're still working on that one, but that has been a big question from our teachers as well. So we're not there yet. We're trying to find really an efficient way to do that. And that's been a bit of a process, exploring different options for that. So hopefully coming soon. And hopefully I can share how we do that once we get that working. Are you pulling the data through views or through tables in your database? For our side, we're doing a little bit of both. Typically through tables, although we do have some views that are a little bit more processed versions of the data. So the views tend to be already summarized a bit more. So yeah, actually a combination of both, but probably primarily tables.
For us, we are basically, we have tables, we have our data science warehouse, so we're pulling in all the information through our tables. For all those processes, we're also going ahead and just pulling from our Infinite Campus cloud to get it into our data science warehouse. And then at the same time, whenever we have a vendor, we basically either they have them drop a file in a folder that we pull in through a ETL process overnight, or we do have views set up and we just have a we basically have like a connection to their server to pull in that data. And then but at the end of the day, we like to put it into the into our own data warehouse. Saw a question about the jacket. This is a really comfortable jacket. It's also slightly cold in Atlanta today. Maybe not like Washington State cold, but I also have grown up in the South the entire time, so I feel like I have plenty of reason to be wearing this today.
We're shaking our heads here in Boulder. We're judging you.
Yeah, so this one is, how do Tableau reports help teachers look at data differently than the reports they receive from assessment companies? I think one of the biggest advantages for us is that we have access to our Infinite Campus database. So if we want our teachers to see our reports not just based on who they tested, but we can even make it about like who's in your classroom right now. So if we had a student that took the same benchmark from down the street, transfer into the school, that teacher, based upon the Infinite Campus information being correct, they would be able to see that student's information that we have in our systems as soon as the data refreshes overnight. I think also whenever I've seen some of the, part of the reason that we created our Phoenix dashboard was because we felt like it was taking our teachers a lot of time to get to that information. I remember I was working with it, I was like 20 clicks in and I still hadn't really found what I was looking for. I was like, why not just build something that we feel can be more beneficial to our teachers that allows us to also bring in data from our servers that maybe our vendor doesn't have access to, right? So we can bring in filters like if the student's economically disadvantaged, if the student has a disability, if the student's English language learner, or even in a gifted course that vendor may not be getting over in the data we send them.
It's also really nice to have one place for them to go to access the data rather than having to, bookmark the site for Dibbles, the site for Reading Plus, whatever it is that they know to go to apsviz.com, what we use, and then, one sign on and then it's all right there.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are great reasons, really, the bringing data together into one place. And also you mentioned like some of the reports from those assessment companies are kind of cumbersome to get to. We really made a point to talk to the people using the reports and see, in some cases, there are reports that are working well, and so, we don't need to make those again, but often we do find that there's a certain way of looking at the data that's not available, or, specific view of the data that we can build out and help to supplement what teachers might be using in that system as well. Okay, a question about security. Where do we apply our row level security? Typically, I will set that up as a data source filter, although sometimes it does have to be done at the sheet level. So we've done a lot of thinking about this. This gets kind of complicated, but especially, one use case that we run into all the time is when we want to show district-wide data versus school-specific, user-specific data. And so that's been a big place where we have to think about that at the sheet level. Row-level security when you're getting down to individual schools or students, but we relax that security if we're showing district statistics overall.
Yeah.
Demo one of the touchstones. Oh, yeah, let me run to my other computer. I'll bring that up. All right. Oh, hope this is working. Okay. So here's an example of one of the touchstones. So yeah, again, it's a pretty simple setup, just bringing an image onto the sheet, but really the content is being brought in at the tooltip level. And so this is kind of the level of what we put in there. So you just hover and you can get a more full description of what's in the view. And then each of those touchstones gives a little bit more detail for a specific aspect of the dashboard.
Yeah, so we use Infinite Campus, and I think I saw that y'all use Infinite Campus too at Boulder.
Yeah.
Infinite Campus is in the cloud now, so we have SSIS packages set up to extract, transfer, and load the data into our data science warehouse. For AWS, we use Matillion, which is another ETL software, and place that into Redshift through the same methods. And yeah, so whenever we do our data agreements for with our vendors, we make sure that we have that clause that says that we get access to the data. That's mainly so that, let's say we end the contract with the vendor, but we do want that data later on after the contract's been terminated. We want to make sure we have that data already in our systems from whenever we did test our students. So yeah, we've had great cooperation with EduTrax as well. It's really great working with them. I can't speak highly enough of their data team over there. Because I remember when we'd ask for well, hey, can we have the item detail information? Yeah, sure. Nobody's ever asked for that. So yeah, just making, it doesn't hurt to ask. That's, I guess, what we've learned so far.
Yeah, and I'll just echo that. We're also on IC. And we have the same in our data agreements with our vendors that we can access that data. And on the technical side, I can refer you to our data warehouse designer as well if you still have questions about that afterwards. Do we use Tableau server interface or embed? We're currently using Tableau server interface, just rebranded, so we call it BizLab. We've kind of changed out the little icon, but otherwise we're using that interface.
Yeah, and we also use the Tableau server interface for the images. So we built a website that hosts the image, and then it's behind the APS firewall, hence why I guess I could have actually interacted with it today since I'm on site. But so then we embed that URL into the dashboard so that whenever they interact with the item, it places the item into the URL, and then it calls that item onto the page. So it'd be like if you had a tweet ID, and that tweet, whenever you clicked on it, would bring up the actual Twitter URL or something like that. I forget the image format. It's like .64 something. But yeah, that's why we also had to make sure put it into a website so that we could use it based upon the way we receive the data. It also helps to not have that big of a variable sitting in your data source, because that could potentially slow down your extract. So we didn't go over any HR dashboards, but we have built some here in APS. We basically, one of the things we took and placed together was there are 3 separate platforms for looking at our teacher evaluation system. There are student growth percentiles, and then we also used to get students' survey results where they would evaluate the teacher. So we built a dashboard that put all that into one single source that our principals could see. One, not just one of the data point for that year, but if they did have a new teacher transfer into their school or be hired by their school, and we had their information in our systems, we could then let them see a year-over-year view of how those teachers trended in terms of different evaluations and metrics.
Yeah, for our part, we do have an HR dashboard of educator evaluation data for 2 years, so it sounds pretty similar. We also have, there's the year-over-year comparison piece, and that was contributed by an analyst in our HR department who's using Tableau. In terms of linking those evaluations to student performance, we have not ventured into that just yet here.
Yeah, so the applications we use, so SSIS and Matillion, those are our ETL applications.
I can't speak as much to this, but we are, I think the data warehousing side is done in SQL Server. I use Alteryx sometimes. That's more for specific requests that I get from users. So that's another tool that we're using here.
So the question is, regarding the Tableau data source, do you use any standard to unify student data to build your own data model?
No, we're not currently using EdFi. We're kind of working, we have our own system that we've built out, but have looked into EdFi and are curious about it.
Yeah, same here. How many staff members in our district are employed primarily for data reporting and building Tableau dashboards? Primarily linked to this project with Tableau, we've got 2. But we are definitely leveraging, we do have analysts working who traditionally worked with other tools in some of our other departments. So I'm thinking HR, enrollment, assessment. We have dedicated analysts there. And so we're really working with that group to try to leverage more Tableau usage. But it's not primarily the tool that they necessarily use now. We're kind of working to get that going more.
Yeah, so we have our 4 data strategists as well as 2 other people sitting on our team. I think there's maybe 1 other employee in our district that has a Tableau license, desktop license, and it's on our finance team. And then in terms of just like, who's looking over the data, we do have our student information systems team that works to make sure that data is reported accurately. And then collecting the data, our testing assessment team, they work hard to make sure that our testing is a seamless process. So the next question is, how do you structure all your dashboards on the server? Yeah, so we have kind of 3 layers. We have a central office. That's going to be our, basically, if you have access to it, you can see all the data. School admin, and that's going to be row level permissions, where we actually have we call it global permissions. So if you are a administrator at this school, then you're tagged to every row of data for your school. So then we use row level permissions as well. And then teachers, we actually built a dimension table in our ODS layer where we have what's called our student teacher links. It refreshes overnight. It's kind of our source of truth for who is in whose classroom right now. It's one of the things where that's why we really emphasize clean data to our schools. And we do have different sites. We have a dev, QA, and product, but we use production for our users in almost all cases, except when our production server is down for like maintenance or an upgrade, we point them to QA.
Hey, this is Patrick. I'm going to cut the questions off after this GIS question, and if people have questions they'd like to follow up with, you provided your contact information. I just don't want to keep you guys on the call. Like the questions kind of keep rolling in, so we need to cut it off somewhere. So let's go ahead and go through the GIS question. I think there's 2 left.
For our part, we haven't really been bringing maps into our visits just yet, so short answer for us.
Yeah, so the way we did that in the visual I showed in today's presentation, that was before shapefiles were able to be brought into, when I made that, before shapefiles were able to be brought into Tableau. So basically we took a shapefile, extracted all the longitude, latitude coordinates, and then plotted that in Tableau with the longitude, latitude, and like a path. Yeah, so it's kind of the old way. You used to have to plot maps in Tableau. Now, if I were doing it again, I definitely use the shapefile option just because I know it's made my work a lot easier, because trying to extract longitude, latitude out of shapefiles, I always forget how to do it. It takes me like 30 minutes in order to remember and then do it again in QGIS.
Okay, I guess with that, Claire, Mary, and Thomas, I really want to thank you guys this morning for a presentation. It was,
yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was really an amazing presentation. I'm not all that familiar with the K-12 area other than being a parent, so even for me it was just very informative. I'm extremely impressed with all that you're doing with Tableau here and the difference it's making in these students' lives. So thank you very much.